field hospital tent stood in the heart of Burkina Faso, filled with heavy air, dust, exhaustion, and the weight of sacrifice. In the distance, faint gunshots echoed through the savannah as the sun sank red behind the horizon. Inside that dim tent, a young soldier named Ismail lay on a makeshift bed, breathing shallowly, his uniform stained with the price he had paid for his country. Beside him stood a man every African recognizes, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the revolutionary leader who rose through the ranks to become the youngest head of state in Burkina Faso. His clothes were still coated with dust from the front lines, and those fierce eyes, the same eyes that had challenged corruption and foreign domination, now carried a completely different emotion. Ismail's hand trembled as he waited, struggling to form what might be his final words. He had a message, one last wish that had to be delivered. But in that moment, what would Traoré do? Would he make empty promises like so many leaders before him? Would he offer hollow comfort? Or would something happen that would redefine what real leadership means? Stay with me, because what occurred in that tent between a dying soldier and his commander would spread across Africa like wildfire, reminding everyone that true leadership isn't measured by speeches or policies, but by the sacred moments where a leader looks into the eyes of those who sacrificed everything and proves their lives matter. It was late afternoon when Captain Traoré received the urgent call. He had been reviewing defense strategies with his commanders in a forward operating base in northern Burkina Faso, an area where the fight against terrorism had taken countless young lives. The message was short but devastating. One soldier, gravely wounded in an ambush, was asking for him specifically. Traoré didn't hesitate. While many world leaders might send representatives or issue statements from the comfort of their offices, Ibrahim Traoré climbed into a military vehicle and went himself to the field hospital. That was who he was, a leader who had vowed to stand with his people, not above them. When he entered the medical tent, the staff stood at attention, but he immediately gestured for them to stop. "Where is Ismail?" he asked softly. They led him to a corner where the young soldier lay on a blood-stained bed. Ismail was only 23. He had joined the military, inspired by Traoré's vision of a free, sovereign Burkina Faso. He believed Africans could defend themselves without foreign armies with hidden agendas. That belief had cost him everything. Bandages wrapped around his abdomen were already soaked with blood. The nurse beside him, tears running down her face, shook her head gently. Nothing more could be done. The closest surgical facility was hours away. Ismail wouldn't survive the trip. Traoré knelt beside the bed, placing his knees in the dusty earth. He took the young man's hand, and Ismail's eyes opened. Recognition flickered through the haze of pain. "My president," he whispered, barely audible over the hum of the generator. "I'm here, brother," Traoré replied, squeezing his hand gently. Ismail struggled to speak. Every breath was a battle. The soldiers around the tent fell silent, watching their leader kneel beside a dying comrade. "I need you to tell them," Ismail gasped. "Tell who, my son? Tell them what?" Traoré leaned closer, placing his ear near the soldier's lips. "My mother, my little sisters, in Bobo Dioulasso," he whispered, each word a desperate effort. "Tell them, I didn't die for nothing. Tell them Burkina Faso will be free." Silence fell across the tent. Everyone understood the weight of those words. This was not just a message, it was a sacred trust. The final wish of a man giving his life for his home. Traoré's jaw tightened. Those who knew him could see the emotion he struggled to contain. This was a man who had survived coup attempts, international pressure, and the threats of imperialist powers. But this, holding the hand of a young man who believed in him enough to die, cut through every layer of strength. "Ismail," Traoré said softly, "look at me." The soldier's fading eyes met his commander's. "I will tell them myself," Traoré promised. "I will go to your home. I will sit with your mother. I will look your sisters in the eyes and say exactly what you asked me to say." A faint smile touched Ismail's cracked lips. A single tear rolled down his dusty cheek. "But I will tell them something else too," Traoré continued, his voice stronger. "I will tell them you were a hero, that you fought for something greater than yourself. And because of soldiers like you, Burkina Faso will never bow to anyone again. Around them, soldiers wiped their eyes. The nurse turned away, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Leaders weren't supposed to make promises like this. Leaders weren't supposed to kneel in the dirt. But Ibrahim Traoré was not like other leaders. Ismail's breath grew weaker, his grip loosening. He tried to speak again, but no words came. His eyes, however, expressed everything: gratitude, peace, and a final moment of dignity. Traoré remained beside him, holding his hand and speaking softly about the future they were building. A future with schools, hospitals, and a nation where mothers no longer lost their sons to foreign-backed terror. And then, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ismail took his final breath. But no one expected what Ibrahim Traoré did next. As the nurses gently covered Ismail's body with a white sheet, the president stayed kneeling on the ground. He kept holding the soldier's hand beneath the cloth, as though letting go would make the loss too real. His security team waited respectfully at a distance. They knew the protocol. The president was supposed to return to the capital. There were security concerns. There were scheduled meetings. There was a nation to run. But one look at Traoré's face told them all one thing: everything else could wait. At last, Traoré rose from the ground. He took a slow breath, straightened his shoulders, and turned toward his chief of staff, who had arrived holding a satellite phone and wearing a deeply worried expression. "Mr. President, we need to talk," the aide began. "Cancel everything on my schedule for tomorrow," Traoré said firmly, cutting him off. "I'm going to Bobo Dioulasso." The aide's eyes widened. "Sir, that's not advisable. The security situation—" "I made a promise to a dying soldier," Traoré interrupted again, his voice calm but immovable, "and I will keep it." Word of Traoré's decision spread quickly through the military camp, and within hours it made its way onto social media and news channels. Reactions were emotional and divided. His supporters celebrated. "This is why we love him, a president who cares about ordinary people." Clips of Traoré eating field rations with soldiers, sleeping in the same harsh conditions, and grieving for fallen comrades began circulating everywhere. But his critics, and he had many, saw an opportunity. Opposition leaders in exile held press conferences. "This is theater," they accused. "Traoré is using a dead soldier for political propaganda. If he cared, he would negotiate peace instead of sending young men to die." International media, often skeptical of African leaders who resist Western influence, questioned his motives. Analysts on TV panels far from Burkina Faso called the visit a calculated publicity move. Even within his own government, some advisors pushed back. That night, the defense minister pulled him aside. "Ibrahim, I understand your feelings," he said quietly, "but you're the president now. You can't personally visit every fallen soldier's family. Where does it end? What about the others? Their families will ask why you didn't come to them." Traoré listened to all of it. The praise, the criticism, and the logistical concerns. They weren't wrong. Leadership was more than emotional gestures. It required systems, planning, and difficult choices. But leadership was also something deeper. Something that couldn't be measured by strategy documents or television debates. That night, alone in his tent, Traoré sat with his thoughts. On the small field desk before him lay Ismail's military ID card, recovered from his belongings. The photo showed a young man with bright eyes and a confident smile. A son, a brother, someone who believed in a better Burkina Faso. Traoré picked up a pen and opened a private journal he kept. Not for speeches, not for the public, but for himself, to process the weight of leadership. "They say I cannot visit every family," he wrote beneath the dim beam of a battery lamp. "They are right, but I can visit this one. I made a promise. And if my word means nothing to a dying soldier, then why do I lead?" He thought of his own journey, how he had climbed the military ranks, seen corruption firsthand, watched foreign powers treat African lives as disposable pieces in their geopolitical games. He remembered the coup that brought him to power and the expectations of millions of young Africans who saw him as a symbol of sovereignty and resistance. But none of that mattered as much as the simple promise he had given to a 23-year-old taking his last breath. Outside his tent, he heard his security team organizing arrangements for the journey. They discussed routes, advanced teams, and the optics of a presidential convoy entering a humble neighborhood. A colonel entered the tent, visibly tense. Sir Pastor, I must strongly advise against this. Bobo Dioulasso has active terrorist cells. You would be vulnerable. If something happens to you, the entire government could collapse. Traoré looked at him steadily. Colonel, how many times have you ordered soldiers into danger? Many times, sir, the officer admitted. And do you think they go because they aren't afraid or because they believe their leaders will not abandon them, even in death? The colonel had no answer. Traoré stood, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. I'm going. Make it as safe as possible. But I'm going. Ismail entrusted me with his last words. His mother will hear them from my mouth, or I am not the leader I claim to be. The next morning, he made a decision that shocked everyone. A convoy of military vehicles entered the streets of Bobo Dioulasso, Burkina Faso's second largest city. This was not a parade nor a political event. There were no banners, no media cameras, no prepared speeches. Traoré had insisted the visit remain as private as possible. This moment wasn't about him. It was about Ismail and the family he left behind. The convoy stopped in a modest neighborhood where small concrete houses lined dusty streets. Children playing football paused, staring in disbelief. Women carrying water pots halted mid-step. The news spread instantly. The president is here. Ismail's family lived in a simple home with a tin roof and faded blue walls. A small garden outside bore signs of careful hands. Someone had planted marigolds along the fence, their bright orange petals defying the hardships around them. Traoré stepped out of the vehicle wearing simple traditional clothing, not his military uniform. The security team stayed discreet. He had demanded minimal presence. This wasn't a state visit. This was a man fulfilling a promise. Before he could knock, the door opened. Ismail's mother stood there, a woman in her 50s, wrapped in a mourning shawl, eyes swollen from hours of tears. She had been told the news the day before. But seeing the president himself standing at her door made her knees tremble. She opened the door slowly, her hands shaking. Traoré stood outside, gently reaching out his hand. May I come in? He asked softly. She couldn't speak. She only nodded and stepped aside, tears already streaming down her face. Inside the small home, Ismail's presence lived in every corner. A school photo hung on the wall. His military graduation portrait sat in a simple frame. On a shelf were his old childhood football trophies. Two young girls, likely his sisters, barely 14 and 16, sat silently on a worn-out sofa, their eyes red from crying. As soon as people realized the president was there, neighbors rushed toward the house, gathering at the windows and door. Traoré's security quietly held them back. This moment was meant to stay private, sacred. Traoré sat across from the mother and her daughters. He didn't give any formal speech. He didn't recite the usual political condolences. Instead, he breathed in deeply and spoke from his heart. Madame, your son asked me to tell you something, he began, his voice steady but gentle. In his final moments, he wanted you to know this. He did not die for nothing. He wanted you to know that Burkina Faso will be free. The mother let out a cry so deep it felt like the room itself trembled. Her daughters clung to each other, crying openly. Traoré continued, his own eyes shining. But there is more you must know, he said. You deserve to understand the kind of soldier your son was, the kind of man he was. For the next 30 minutes, Ibrahim Traoré did something extraordinary. He didn't speak of Ismail as a statistic or a casualty. He spoke of him as a human being. He told them how Ismail shared his food with younger recruits, how he never missed writing a weekly letter home, how soldiers had told Traoré that Ismail always volunteered for the most dangerous patrols because he said he was fighting for the future of his sisters. He told them about Ismail's final moments, not hiding the truth, but speaking with a tenderness that made the room feel almost sacred. He described how Ismail had smiled when Traoré promised he would visit his family, how his last thoughts were of them. Your son believed in something greater than himself, Traoré said, meeting the mother's gaze. He believed African nations have the right to defend themselves. He believed we do not need foreign soldiers to protect our children. He believed Burkina Faso belongs to its people. Then Traoré did something that stunned everyone present. He reached into his pocket and took out Ismail's military ID, the one he had held the previous night. Ismail wanted you to have this, he said, placing it gently into the mother's trembling hands. Then he removed the insignia from his own collar, the symbol of his rank, the mark of a president and military commander. A simple piece of metal, but at that moment it carried the weight of the nation. This was mine, Traoré said quietly, but your son earned it more than I ever have. He gave everything. Please keep this and remember that your son died wearing the uniform of a free nation. Not a colony, not a puppet state, a free nation. The mother clutched the insignia to her chest. Through her tears, she finally spoke. Thank you. Thank you for keeping your promise. Thank you for seeing my son as a person, not just a soldier. Outside, the crowd had gone silent. Many were crying, some with hands over their hearts. They had witnessed something rare, a leader who understood that power means nothing if you cannot lay it aside to honor a dying soldier's final wish. Suddenly, the younger sister stood up and walked straight toward Traoré. Before anyone could react, she threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. He loved you, she cried. He believed in you so much. He always said you would save our country. Traoré held her as tears finally streamed down his own face. No, he whispered. It is he who saved our country, Ismail, and all the others like him. I am only trying to be worthy of their sacrifice. The room broke into tears, not of despair, but of something powerful. Shared grief, shared humanity, shared hope. But what happened next changed everything. News of Traoré's visit spread across Africa faster than any official press release. Witnesses shared their recordings online. A neighbor who watched through the window posted, I saw our president crying with a mother who lost her son. Real tears, real grief. This is leadership. A simple phone video went viral, reaching millions in hours, then translated across dozens of countries. People from Senegal to South Africa, from Kenya to Ghana, shared the same message. This is what African leadership looks like. In military bases across Burkina Faso, soldiers gathered to watch the video. Many cried. Their reasons for joining the army had been different. Job, adventure, necessity. But after watching their leader honor a fallen soldier, their purpose changed. Recruitment tripled within weeks. Young men and women didn't sign up for money or glory. They signed up because they finally believed that if they fell, they would not be forgotten. Ismail's mother became an unexpected symbol of dignity and courage. She gave one interview, not for money, but because she felt her son deserved to be remembered. Sitting in her small home, surrounded by flowers and flags left by grieving citizens, she spoke calmly and powerfully. The president was not. The mother's voice trembled as she spoke. He didn't have to come, she said softly. He could have sent a representative. He could have sent money. But he came himself because he made a promise to my son. And in our culture, a promise made to a dying soul is sacred. She raised the small emblem Traoré had placed in her hands. This will stay in our family forever. My granddaughters will grow up knowing that their uncle died for something that mattered, that leaders can be honorable, and that promises can still be kept. Across Africa, something began to shift. For years, the world had repeated the same story. African leaders are corrupt, selfish, disconnected from their people. That narrative had been used to justify interference, exploitation, and the idea that Africa could not govern itself. But Traoré's visit shattered that narrative completely. Here was a leader who could have remained in comfort, in safety, who could have sent official condolences, who could have treated soldiers as expendable pieces in a geopolitical game. Instead, he chose to stand beside the mother of a 23-year-old soldier, risking his own safety to keep a simple promise. He cried with her, he listened to her, and he handed her his own military insignia, because symbols mean nothing unless they carry humanity behind them. Even the international observers who dismissed him as just another military ruler were forced to rethink this was not the behavior of a dictator. This was the behavior of a man who understood that real power doesn't come from guns or decrees. Real power comes from the love and trust of the people. Across African universities, students debated what this moment meant. Was this the beginning of a new generation of African leadership? Was this a model of people-centered governance the world had refused to acknowledge? Could more nations rise with leaders like this? 6 months later, A monument was erected. Not a statue of Traoré, he refused that. Instead, it was a memorial to Ismail and all the soldiers who had fallen defending Burkina Faso's sovereignty. At the center was a simple engraving, the final words of Ismail, "I did not die for nothing. Burkina Faso will be free." During the inauguration, Traoré stood beside the soldiers' mother and sisters. Thousands attended, civilians, students, elders, and soldiers. When the monument was revealed, a heavy silence swept the entire crowd. Not sorrow, but pride. Traoré stepped forward and said, "We did not build this to glorify war. We built it to remind ourselves why we fight. We fight so our children never have to. We fight so Burkina Faso can stand on its own. And we fight because young men like Ismail believed we could." He turned to the grieving mother, "Madam, your son's message has been delivered, and it will be carried by every generation after us. Burkina Faso will be free." As the ceremony ended, something incredible happened. People didn't rush home. They quietly approached the family, strangers who had never met them, shaking their hands, thanking them, embracing them, and many approached Traoré as well, not begging for favors, not showing fear of power, but standing before him as humans, thanking another human who did something deeply right. An elderly woman bent with age slowly walked up to him. "My grandson is a soldier," she whispered. "If something happens to him, I now know he matters. Thank you for showing us that our children's lives are sacred." Traoré gently embraced her. "They have always been sacred, grandmother," he said. "I'm only trying to make sure we never forget that." And that is why this story of Ibrahim Traoré will never fade. In a world where leadership is often measured by economic numbers and political victories, Traoré reminded everyone of the true measure of leadership: the ability to see humanity in others, the courage to keep promises when it is difficult, and the understanding that every life sacrifice for a greater cause deserves honor, remembrance, and love. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that real leadership still exists, share it. Let the world see what becomes possible when leaders choose compassion over convenience, integrity over image, and humanity over power. Subscribe for more stories of Ibrahim Traoré and other leaders redefining African leadership, because these are not just stories, they are proof that a better world is possible.